ready to master the waves of medical device product development? Well, wax up your surfboard because you are listening to Inspired by Imua. And here is your medical device product development expert, that Hawaiian-hearted hostess who will help you hang 10, Meghan Alonso.
And aloha! I've got some big changes coming up and I wanted to share. Innovation Warriors, you voted and we listened. We're in the process of rebranding the podcast to, drumroll, MedTech Inspired. We'll keep you updated with these changes over the next few weeks. Want to get started on your product but don't know where to begin? Invention Idea to Profitable Product gives you the step-by-step plan to be a fundable business plus the perfect pitch in just 100 days. Sign up for a free trial at imua-services.com/IIPP. Imua is spelled IMUA, and it's a Hawaiian word that means to advance forward with passion. Again, that address is imua-services.com/IIPP. Let's get started with our featured guest today, Kay Fabella.
Storyteller and communication strategist Kay Fabella empowers businesses to connect with their audience and customers by crafting meaningful communication strategies. Kay applies her experience as a world-recognized author, speaker, and trainer to help startups to Fortune 500 companies. A Los Angeles native based in Madrid, she's been featured in the Huffington Post and El País. Kay, are you ready to hang 10?
You got it.
All right, so I gave that little bio. Tell me a little bit more about yourself.
Sure. So as you said, I am a storyteller and a communication strategist, and I specifically work with entrepreneurs and startups and basically businesses of all kinds because all of us need to actually share our story and communicate what we do in a way that's effective. And yeah, it all kind of started actually because I live in Spain. I came here when I studied abroad, fell in love with Madrid, where I now live, came back, met my now husband, and I've been here now for 7 years. And so I think a big part of communication and my passion for it came from really wanting to understand how different people communicate in different languages. And then when I started working in marketing and communications, I realized that all businesses, whether they were speaking in English or Spanish, all struggled to answer that question of, so what do you do? And that's where I really got into figuring out that everybody's message starts with a really compelling story. And so that's what I do now.
Yeah, that's so important no matter what business you're in. Businesses are selling services, they're selling products, but at the end of the day, we're all people and we connect with people. So that story is really needed.
Exactly. Yeah. Business and personal relationships are all built on communication. And stories are how we naturally connect with each other. And so it's really important for all of us to highlight what makes us unique, what makes us different, and really why we're creating what we're creating. And so that's what I help different businesses do.
Mm-hmm. So you're an expert at this communication strategy and storytelling. What's one thing you've done recently to increase your expertise?
Well, I think I joke with my clients that storytelling isn't a sprint, it's a marathon. And so you have to constantly learn to improve how you communicate to other people. So, I'm reading up on different industries always. I invest in programs to connect with entrepreneurs around the world, read as many books as I can per month because, words are my jam. So that's what I need to kind of feed myself. And I always seek out different kinds of mentors because, storytelling is just one of those things that gets better with practice. So I'm constantly writing and speaking and, communicating with different types of businesses and testing different stories as well across different mediums, because it's not just the story that you tell about your product. It's also learning to adapt it to the different audience that you're talking about it to. And that's what I then teach to my own clients.
Wow, that's some big takeaways. And I wrote that down, adapting to your different clients or your avatars, or, you may target a few different industries or a few different personas. And you're exactly right. The way you speak to each one of them is going to be different. Maybe they have different pain points, or maybe one group speaks highly scientific language and the others don't know what some of those words mean. So
exactly. Yeah. At the end of the day, it's creating the message that your audience wants to hear, really, and selling, and that lets you sell whatever it is that you do, whether it's an app or a product or a service, with confidence. So
yeah, that's good. So what's one thing that medtech entrepreneurs or startups don't know that they need to know?
So I've worked with a bunch of different startups, especially because here in Madrid, we have Google Campus. It's the 4th ever Google Campus that's been opened in the world. So I've seen literally every kind of startup possible. And one of the things I've noticed that a lot of them struggle with is communicating why people should care. And so you actually brought up a really good point. Like, it's one thing to adapt to the audience. So, speaking to somebody who's more scientifically oriented versus, the end consumer. It's easy when you're really close to that product or that app, because you're creating something that you're so passionate about that you're speaking that language and that jargon constantly. And so when you then have to communicate it to your customer, unless you're able to make them or your potential investors even care, you're never going to earn their attention or their trust or even their own willingness to buy into whatever it is that you're offering. So my advice to different startups as they're creating their app, and I know there's long sleepless nights that go into that, is to every so often zoom out from your own business or your own product and just, remember the customer that you're there to serve. So putting yourself in their shoes, really trying to think specifically like how your product or your app or whatever you're offering specifically makes their lives better, and how you can communicate the emotional benefit in terms that they'll actually be able to understand.
Yeah, so in my program, Invention Idea to Profitable Product, I talk about benefits versus features and how to communicate that. It's one thing to say, like when the iPhone came out, for example, people weren't used to that. So if you were like, hey, I've got this phone that has a 4x6 screen and it's touch screen, you're like, well, what does that give me? But then if you say, that, that's an example of a feature versus a benefit would be, hey, I've got this phone that's also like a computer in your pocket, and you can search the internet on it. You can take pictures, you can take videos. Then people are like, oh, wow, that's cool.
Exactly.
It's just making that separation of what is it that people want.
Exactly. Selling them what they want and kind of giving them what they need. Like you can get to the facts and the features and all that stuff later. What you care about is getting them to care first, enough that they then ask the follow-up question of, where do I sign up? How do I download this? How do I find out more?
Exactly.
And actually, there's a really good, one of my mentors in storytelling used to say that when you're talking to your audience, you don't want to go open kimono. You just want to show the shoulder. Like, the last thing you want to do is overwhelm them with all of the information. And yes, of course, maybe all of it seems relevant to you because you're in it. But you also have to understand the journey of the customer or the audience member, the avatar, where they are. And they're not as adept at, for example, at the vocabulary or kind of the technicalities behind it. So figure out what the shoulder is and sell them on that.
And one thing I would recommend is, you mentioned zooming out of your own business, and that's key, although it's really difficult. So I recommend that companies or individuals hire someone like you, because you're seeing it from the outside. There's things, and I've experienced that in my own business. I feel like I'm pretty good at helping people with theirs, and it's not mine. But then when it's mine and I'm creating it, I've fallen victim to that too, where I'm like, I'm not communicating this. It's not coming across as it should be. And then when you bring someone else in that's seeing it from the outside, it just makes so much of a difference.
I definitely agree. And yeah, if I can, plug what I do, absolutely.
Yeah. So besides me, give us an example of someone that you've seen that could have used your advice.
So So I know that when we talked about this, you mentioned not to mention any names, and I think this one's pretty obvious, but a certain car sharing service that we use on our phones has been in the news repeatedly and not in a good way.
Yeah.
And I mean, there's been consistently more negative press associated with their name than good. I can't remember the last good thing that was just written about them, And so I think one of the other aspects to story that I have to remind different startups to remember is that putting in the work to really understanding your customer and creating an app or a product from a place of service is really important, not just for what you externally communicate to your customers, but it's also important to have the right story in place for your entire organization. Because no matter how big it gets, that same message, that same core belief or set of values or that story that you want people to be, to people to align around should be the same both internally and externally. And I think that was what happened in the case of this not to be named company.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that, internally and externally. That's good. So share a success story that you've had lately. And this can be, one of your clients that you've helped or anything along those lines.
Yeah, so actually I had a really exciting opportunity to work with a client who created the first ever product of its kind in the world. And I can't really go into too much detail yet because of NDAs and all that stuff. Mm-hmm. But basically, he got the opportunity to speak about it live to a massive media outlet. And of course, he was nervous, as most people are with that kind of opportunity. So he was just beside himself trying to figure out, what do I say? How do I say it? I have a very limited window that I can share it in. So I have to be compelling, but I also have to be strategic. And so what we did together in our sessions is we sat down, we wrote down all the different questions that, in this case, the reporter was his audience could potentially ask. And then we kind of figured out, we worked backward. So one of the things that is a key point of your story is figuring out how you got there. So your origin story, as we say. And then we mapped out the creation of his product in a way that resonated with the exact target audience that he was hoping to attract. And then on top of that, we broke down the 3 key benefits that we wanted to highlight. And I think that was the hardest part, actually. It was 3 out of multiple, which I think tends to happen. Trying to focus on the ones that made the most sense in the short time span that he had. And the great news is that his interview went perfectly, and it actually got the attention of some of the largest brands in the sports industry, like Nike and Reebok. And he told me that there's hundreds of millions of dollars in offers on the table just from this one. I think the interview itself ended up being no more than 5 minutes long. So we did what we set out to do. So we're both really excited.
Wow, that's awesome. So in addition to, what does it look like when a client works with you? So I imagine that you have kind of a structure of, hey, let's get you this story, let's get you that story. You mentioned the origin story.
Yeah.
Then do you help them get media attention?
Yeah. So what I do is, what I've been specifically working on is a lot of pitching. Yeah, a lot of pitching, especially being here in Madrid. The benefit of me being bilingual is that a lot of startups that want to come to Silicon Valley, because, it's still the mecca for startups of where they want to get VC funding and try and get in front of Google and Apple and all those bigger names. It's been great because a lot of those people end up coming to me because they're like, well, maybe sometimes their English is not their native language. Or being European, I found that the culture between Europe and America is very different in terms of, a European is more likely at a networking event to give you their whole story. An American is more likely to say, I'm this, and this is my job description, and here's what I can do for you. And that different dynamic is really, really important to adapt. So anyway, what happens is whenever a startup comes through is first we sit down and figure out who your different clients are. And I call it an exercise in business empathy. We map out the emotional map of your different client avatars and figure out where they are and where they want to be. And that then serves as the frame of the basis for the story that we then create. So that story, we start from your origin story of how you found this idea, why you're in business, why they should care about you, and why now. And then from that origin story, we start to figure out all the little micro stories and anecdotes that are necessary for your overall communication strategy. And right now it's basically the majority of my clients have really wanted it for their pitch.
Yeah.
Because again, like I said before, like it has to be compelling and it has to connect with the people that you're talking to, but it also has to be really strategic. So any text or any language or any, bullet point on a slide that you don't need, that doesn't need to be there, we go through that together. And that way you're more likely to, stand out from the hundreds of people I'm sure that a VC, for example, is seeing one after the other every single day. And so, yeah, that's how we work together.
Yeah, that's great. And it's also to make things even more difficult. You need to have all of those stories in place and all those strategies in place. But then when you're pitching to the customer at that point in time is the investor. So Then you have to have the story of not only am I trying to sell my clients later on, but how am I trying to sell this investor? Like, what do they want and need right now? And how can I give it to them wrapped up in this pitch?
Exactly. Yeah. And you hit the nail on the head there, Megan. It really comes down to knowing how to adapt the same story, but framing it in the benefits that matter most to the audience that you're speaking to. And investors are a completely different beast from the final customer.
Mm-hmm. So what are some challenges that you've seen? You brought that up. I didn't even think of that. But there's not only a language barrier, but there's also cultural barriers. So
definitely,
that's really insightful to frame that for them.
Absolutely. And it's something that you learn over time. I mean, I've been here 7 years, and it's something that I think when you become an observer of people and especially when you run into tons of different business owners that I have over the years, you start to see that there's a common thread between culture really influences how you speak and how you communicate. And I found, I think one of the things Americans do very well, maybe to a fault even, is we really know how to amp ourselves up. And we know instinctively how to get to the point. Whereas I think especially for a lot of Europeans, and especially if English is not your first language, they tend to be much more long-winded about how their product works or how they started it and why the audience that they're speaking to should care. Mm-hmm. And so it's also about, it all comes back down to who's your audience and how do you speak to them. But that also is an extra filter in terms of, I have this audience that cares more about, numbers, for example, or that cares more about, me just getting quickly to the point and not getting too much into the backstory of how this started. And so I think that's the other thing that I forgot to mention that I also work on is let's thresh out what the full story is. And then sometimes it's using the same story and slightly adapting it. Sometimes it's cutting out unnecessary details and making it more targeted. So yeah, it's true. I really think that Americans have kind of a cultural dominance in terms of presentation skills, and it ends up being more work for my European-based clients than for my American ones.
Wow, interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we've gotten a ton of value from Kay so far. We're going to be right back with her best advice after a word from our sponsors.
What do Oprah, Bill Gates, Mark Zuckerberg, and hopefully you have in common? They all read or listen to over 30 books per year. I've got a way you can get there too. I listen to audible.com audiobooks, walking my dog Abby in the car, getting ready in the mornings, and I've got a free 30-day trial for Audible that you can claim over at imua-services.com/free book. Right now, I highly encourage you to check out The Lean Startup by Eric Reis. Are you tired of going to pitch competitions and not getting the investors' attention? Build your pitch the right way with a solid foundation. Invention Idea to Profitable Product walks you through building a startup around your idea to make you attractive to investors and gives you the perfect pitch in just 100 days. Try it out free at imua-services.com/IIPP.
Okay, so Kay, what's the best advice you can give medtech entrepreneurs?
Ooh, best advice. Let me think of something that you can remember. Okay, clear is better than clever every single time.
Ooh, that's good.
It doesn't matter how many features you list off or how many fancy industry words you're trying to dazzle them with. And I think we tend to think that the longer our syllables are, the more likely we are to get buy-in. And it's actually not the case, because at the end of the day, your customer needs to care about what you do, and also be able to understand and clearly share what it is that you do to other people, because it's not just the story that you tell in the moment that you meet them where they are. It's the story that they'll tell about you when you're not in the room. So make it easy for them to share and spread your message, clear over clever, every single time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that. You want them to remember you, so then they'll share. Mm-hmm. So what's the best book that you recommend and why?
Oof, so many. I love books. I keep coming back to Start With Why by Simon Sinek. I really do. I think even just the title itself, it's so important for any business owner to, obviously we're all in business because we want to make money, but it shouldn't be the primary reason. And it gets to a point where your audience, whether they're customers or investors, they are going to want to know increasingly more about where your heart is and what your conscience as a business looks like and what your real purpose is behind why you're creating what you're creating. So starting with why, I have a copy of that that's just like doggy-eared and highlighted and all the stuff, just because I always come back to it and learn from it. And I highly recommend it.
Yeah, and I think especially more so with the millennial generation, and then I think it's Generation Z. I think that's what they're calling the generation that's just graduated high school and below. That's especially true. People I've noticed are really wanting that purpose-driven company, and they want to know the why. It's important that they know these details because they're craving people. We as a society have shifted so much on online stuff, and that because of that, we're kind of missing that connection with people. But if you can feel like you're having a connection with people when you do business with Warby Parker that donates a pair of eyeglasses somewhere when you buy a pair, or Tom's shoes, you just feel good because you know what their mission is. If it's just a business that you're just buying something, it's transactional. It doesn't feel as good.
Yeah, I so agree. And yeah, you're right. I think it may have to do with the generation. It may have to do with our culture and kind of our awareness in terms of now we care much more about where we spend our hard-earned dollars.
Yeah, that's true.
And that's reflected in, our purchasing power as consumers. And so if you're not able to communicate the why behind what you do, not just outwardly, but internally, as we said earlier in this conversation, I think that, that's a guidepost that I think is a must now for any business as they move forward into Generation Z. Yeah. I hadn't heard that before. That's so interesting. Yeah.
All right. So what's the best way to get in touch with you, and what's your favorite quote?
Okay, so I put together a special pitching guide, or at least a basic outline for anybody who's planning on pitching in the near future. So if you go over to kfabella.com/pitching, you can go ahead and download it there. And my favorite quote is from Dr. Maya Angelou, and she said, "I've learned that people will forget what you said. People will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel." And so no matter where you are in terms of your story or how you're trying to communicate your business to others to get in front of the right people so that they will connect with it, always remember that no matter what you say, you should always keep in mind how you want to make them feel first, and then go from there.
Yeah, that's so important to remember. And I always try to think about that when I'm interacting with people. But you dug a layer deeper of when you're putting together your website, or when you're putting together your product, or even when you're putting together your pitch. Like you're strategically thinking about that when you're doing those things beyond just how you interact with someone.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think I could add another quote from my mom. She always used to say, how you do one thing is how you do everything. And I think that's super important in business.
Wow. That's a good one too. All right. Well, thanks so much for being on the show today. I know we all are taking away a ton of value, and yeah, we look forward to acting on this too.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for having me, Megan. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Mahalo for joining us. If you're new to riding the waves of medical device product development, or if you've been in development for a while already, Inspired by Imua is here to surf with you. Want to be a master of the waves? Text HANG10, that's HANGTEN, to 44222. We'll send you the most common wipeouts companies make in product development so you can avoid them and reach master wave status. Again, that's HANG10 to 44222. We publish a new episode every Tuesday, so catch us at inspiredbyimua.com. Imua!